Hi guys. So today we're going to talk about the state of the world. This is our first class on your own. It's very exciting. This is not going to be maybe your typical one because there's not a lot of notes. In fact, I don't know if I have any notes other than what I say out loud. I don't know if that's good or bad. It worked last year when I did this. But it's a lot of maps, a lot of pictures, and I'll have the PowerPoint up on the Canvas page so you can look at those maps if you want to as we go through this. I guess it's on the screen here, but also if you want to go back and look at them later. It also has my notes on there that I'm kind of working off. But this is tricky because we're covering a huge, like this is what we call macro history. This is like the big stuff as opposed to sort of the details of it. And we just want to talk about what the world was like. What was the state of the world at the beginning of this class, I guess you could say. The class, I mean, I know we did the Italian Renaissance, which dips into the 1400s, but essentially this class begins at 1500. So what did the world look like? It's usually considered a big moment for the obvious reasons, as you guys read. 1492 is when Columbus goes over and quote-unquote discovers America, and that changes a whole bunch of things. So let's talk about what the world was like at this point and why some of this stuff matters. We'll come back to the world later on, but for now, let's just take a look at this. All right, here's map number one. This is a map from the Middle Ages. Now, maps are, okay, here's your little aside for today, your abstract aside. Maps are not accurate depictions of the world. Even Google Maps is not an accurate depiction of the world. All maps have to simplify in some way. They try to convey something to the reader, what the sort of the reader wants. So for example, when I go to my Google Maps on my phone because I'm trying to get somewhere, what I want to do is I want to find the route from point A to point B, which means they'll show me streets and things like that, but they won't necessarily show me the houses on the streets, or they'll show me this or that, because that's not important. So they've filtered out those sorts of things. If I'm trying to do an architectural thing where I'm trying to build a building, now all of a sudden where the buildings are matters more, so I want a different map. That's the idea. And so I point that out because you look at this map and you say, man, back in the Middle Ages, they were horrible map writers. That is not how the world looks. It's completely crazy. And that's okay because the point is not, this is not a map that I would put on my, I don't know, my camel, and I would be able to find my way to China via this map. That's not the thing. It's trying to convey some message. And so you look at this and you say, okay, what's the message that's being conveyed? So I want you to just think about this for a second. I'm trying not to make this too long today. So I want to make this, but I do want to do some things with you, and it's hard to do without you sitting in front of me to ask what you think. So I'm just going to throw some questions out, and you just sort of work with me. So I want you to look, and I want you to think, by the way, whenever you look at a map, one of the things you should look at is what is in the middle of the map. Like, where do they center this map around, and why? So if we look at this and we say, where is the center of this map? The answer is, it's not the exact center. I know you're looking at the Black Sea there, or what you think is the Black Sea, but this is really the center of the map, Jerusalem. Why would the map makers in the Middle Ages thought Jerusalem was the center of the world? For obvious reasons. That is, Christianity and all that kind of stuff. Europe is a small backwater on the periphery. It's connected to the whole thing, but it's a periphery. The Europeans didn't think we are the center of the earth. They would have said, first of all, I know there's lots of earth out there, that kind of thing. The center of the earth, if we considered Europe the center of the earth, then all of a sudden I'm more connected. Remember, we talked about this with some of our other areas. Like, remember, in the Middle Ages, I am just a pilgrim on earth. My whole goal is to get to heaven. This is keep me out of heaven. That's heaven right there. So that's the center of the map, and that explains sort of those things. And again, geographically, if we look at this, we can see that Europe is just sort of off here to the side. It's connected to the whole thing, but there's a bigger area here. Africa was a part of this. Asia was a part of this, and there were trade routes that were sort of moving through these areas. But Europe was not the center, and they didn't think they were the center. All right, that's good. That's a good start. That takes us to books. You don't have to write these books down. I'm just giving you some examples of some things because there's this big debate about why Europe ends up dominating the world. By the time we get to the end of this course in 1789, 1800, Europe's it. I mean, Europe not only is the most dominant power in the world, they've actually gone around and taken over most of the world. They have essentially colonized the rest of the world. With a couple exceptions, Europe's running the world in 300 years. And that raises a huge question in everybody's mind, and that question is, how come Europe did this? Because honestly, Europe was a bit of a backwater. Why did Europe become the thing that took over everything? Why not other places? And particularly China. China in 1500 was way better poised than Europe was, or any European country was, to become the power of the earth. And so we talk about sort of what these explanations were. Now, it's not very difficult to understand what the European explanations, because those are where we get most of these explanations from, is from European scholars. And they're going to throw out things, again, not so much anymore, but especially in the 1700s, 1800s, if you ask them, how come Europe took over everything? The answer was fairly simple for them. They would say, well, there's one of two things. Either one, the Europeans are just superior in terms of things like race, geography, maybe, religion, culture, but you know, the British Empire, for example, is going to make this argument pretty solidly that there's a reason why the British race took over the world, because the British race is super awesome, and Christianity is super awesome, and British culture is super awesome. In fact, all these things are so awesome, you guys probably want this stuff too. So we'll just come in and provide it for you in this thing called colonization. All right, messy. The alternative to those arguments for the Europeans was essentially not so much that we're superior, but you guys are inferior. And so we have to help you become like us. The French really kind of fell behind this one much more than the British did, which was when the French colonials would show up, they would say, we're going to help you guys be as good as the French. So here we go. You guys are inferior right now, but you can catch up, and we'll get you there, whether you like it or not. Super messy, super awful. It lined up with colonialism and all that kind of stuff. But one of the truth of the matter is the question about why Europe is a tough one to ask and answer, because we only have what we call one case. We have an N of one, N equals one. There's only one case. We don't have 300 different worlds, and we put them in a computer simulation, and we can see what pops out. We only have one world, so it's hard to say what is the causal explanation for why Europe kind of does this. Some theories that get thrown out there more recently are things like China was overpopulating, but Europe had family practices like things like marriage and things like that limited the population growth, the type of marriage in Europe. That's not true. Property rights was another thing. That's not true. So the current answer comes from a guy named Kenneth Pomerantz, this guy right here. This is the one that, again, it's not that I would say this is the correct answer. This is just the answer that's dominant right now in the world. And that is that two things. There's two things that made Europe, I guess, quote unquote, win, and the rest of them not. That's not a great word. Win's not the word I want to go with here. That meant that Europe is the one that dominated the world and the rest didn't. So here's the two explanations. Number one is the distribution of energy generating resources. That's a real fancy way of just saying Europe had lots of coal. And so when they went to power stuff, when the Industrial Revolution kicked in, they had lots of stuff there to power all this stuff. Some of the other areas of the world, like areas like where Islam was dominant, didn't have a lot of coal. Yeah, they have a lot of oil, but that doesn't become a big energy resource until much, much later. So at the time where this is happening, the energy resource, Europe's got it. The second explanation Pomerantz gives is this what he calls an quote unquote accident. The accident that Europe discovered the Americas before China did. That's essentially the thing. China could have easily discovered the Americas first. Europe discovered them first. Again, a lot of quotes around discover here. And that's going to make sort of the difference. But this isn't very helpful either. The term accident, like, whoops, is that America? So that doesn't really help us either. So how come Europe stumbled onto the New World? Let's see. Map number, whatever this is, 3. All right, so maybe it's only 2. I don't know. It's a map. If you look at this, this is the population in 1500. It's a population distribution map. Essentially, instead of showing a map that shows geography, like what's the size of that country in terms of miles, this is a map that shows the size of a country or area in terms of people. So the bigger the country is, the more people that would be in it. So for example, here's China, and China's got lots of people, so it's a big fatty right there. But then say Russia at this time in 1500 didn't have a lot of people. It's still pretty cold there, and so it's skinny. So that's what we're looking at. You'll see here Japan. Look how big Japan is. There's just a lot of people on Japan. And again, there weren't that many people in the world, so as a percentage of the total people in the world, there's a lot of people in Japan. And what we can look at here is we can kind of break this down into three big chunks, because that's kind of how things end up. You've got chunk number one, Europe. You got chunk number two, Islam. And you got chunk number three, China, and we're going to include Japan into that because it's sort of the same. It's not that China dominated Japan at the time, but China and Japan were more closely linked at that time. Okay, so this is great. We got these three big chunks. Now, it doesn't include everything, but there's not a lot going on over here. There's not a lot of people, I should say. Africa's got a lot of people, but not a lot of other things going on. And then Indonesia is just Indonesia, and it's going to become a hot mess very quickly. This is going to become the colonialism number one. If the Americas are a place that get a lot of colonization, Indonesia is going to get a lot more because that's where spices are and things like that, and it's going to be a huge sort of center of this. But the point is, I want to point out these three empires because in 1500 we can kind of describe the state of the world in 1500 as these three empires. Now, obviously, Europe's not an empire. Islam wasn't really an empire. China wasn't an empire. But these are sort of, I guess you could say, civilizations, and they were closely linked to each other, and then more loosely linked like this through trade. Okay, fantastic. So again, we're still at this point of there's very few people in the Americas. Honestly, in fact, if you want to go to the Americas, there's just not much over there. When they first discover the Americas, they're going to find things like gold and silver, but honestly, they're just going, is that it? There's no people here, or there's not a lot of people here, and especially as the Europeans get over there and bring diseases with them, there's going to be fewer and fewer people in the Americas, so it looks more deserted than it actually was when they first showed up. So so this is the question that we want to ask. Why did Europe eventually, or very quickly in the 1500s, why did Europe take over this and not Islam and not China? So let's start here with why not Islam. That's an easier one than the why not China. Why not Islam? We look at Islam in this time, and they have several empires within this. The Mughal, the Safavid, the Ottoman. There were a few other ones that were in here, but Islam basically was in this whole area, including, at this point, North Africa, which is why we might even consider North Africa on that last map a part of this empire. So let me ask you this. What is Islam's incentive? What's their incentive to go over here? Here's the deal. Islam is like the middleman. We talked about this the other day when we were talking about money in Italy. Islam's the middleman. Stuff in China being traded to Europe has to go through the Islamic areas. They get a cut of that, just like Walmart gets a cut of everything. Stuff in Europe going to China, they get a cut of that. There's trade going on here, there's trade going on here. Islam is sitting pretty good. Like there's not a lot of reasons for any of these empires to go anywhere because essentially the money's coming to them. They're essentially landlocked. Now you got the Indian Ocean, which is fine, but we'll talk about that later. This system works for them. The money's coming to them and there's not a lot of competition. By the mid-1500s, Portugal is going to be coming around here and starting to mess with their business over here. But even then, Portugal's only sending over like a few ships. It's not like it's a real competition for the Mughal Empire. It will become that, but it's not at this point. There's no real incentive for Islam to say, we better go find some more stuff. All right, so that's Islam. I'll also show you this right here, this map, and this is routes. So you have sea routes, and you'll note that the sea route in Indian Ocean doesn't go around over here to the Atlantic Ocean. It's just in here. That's going to be the Portuguese who are going to sort of figure that out and come over here like that. So for now, the Indian Ocean's like a lake. It's trading amongst itself here, but it's not trading with other places. Most of the stuff is moving by land over this. Even the stuff that moves by sea here in the Indian Ocean is going to eventually head up through here and go through here over to Italy. So essentially what you have is, again, this area, lots of trade, and it's all passing through this area, and it's all great. Now, one of the things I want you to notice on this is I showed you that big area over here like that. And then you'll note it's really just one node. And there's probably a couple more, but honestly, most of the trade that was going through China is happening through here. And I want to ask you, despite its huge population and a little spoiler alert, huge wealth, why is there only one node? What does that tell us about China? So that takes us to China. In China, there are lots of political entities. So you have the Ming Dynasty, which is what we really call China. But you have Laos, and you have Siam, you have Tibet, Mongolia. You have a number of different, and Japan also over here has a number of different things as well. There's a lot of different political entities in Asia, but Ming China dominates them all. It's like, I don't really have to take you over. I don't need your territory. I'm in control. You will send me, offerings every year, supplication every year, and, we'll just kind of live together. It's all great. As long as you recognize, and this is Ming China talking, as long as you recognize that we're the center of the whole thing, do your thing. You go for it. So it's not sort of like we would see in Europe where you have France versus Britain versus Spain. You have here kind of more of a hierarchical system where they all recognize these guys are at the top. All right, that's great. What that means then is that dominance, that hierarchical structure, actually makes it end up less likely that anyone's going to sort of go out and find something else like the Americas. Everybody is forced kind of to come to it. This becomes, I guess the best way I can say this is think of Ming China like this Nanjing here, like the center of gravity, okay? And so these guys are orbiting around this center of gravity and basically attracted to it, I guess you could say in a way. But this is sort of its own little solar system here. There's no incentive to sort of go check other things out. Even with trade, the trade is sort of controlled from the middle as much as possible just because there's no real incentive. It's all fine. This is working. There's no reason to go really anywhere else. And in fact, going somewhere else could actually undermine this system. These guys in the middle don't want a lot of other things coming in or out because that can sort of mess things up. So they really tightly control ideas and trade and all that stuff that can come in or out. So it ends up being what we call pretty isolationist. Kind of keeps to itself. It sees itself as the center of everything. It's isolationist. Everything's chill. In fact, to the point where in the 1400s, so right up here, early 1400s, well before Columbus, you have this guy named Zhang He. Zhang He is in China, and he is the admiral for the Navy. And so the Chinese, this is before the Ming, the Chinese send out him with this huge fleet of boats. Now this, I'm going to see if I can get this right here. This is to scale over here, these boats. So this is Columbus's boat. This is the size of the head boat of that fleet, Zhang He's fleet. It's huge. I mean, these were pretty remarkable. Like, China was the stuff. It had it all going on. It had money. It had power. It had all this ability. And what Zhang He's job was to do is to sail the fleet around through here. You can see all these different areas. And he would go through there and say, China's awesome. Let's have our tribute. We'll give you some gifts. You give us some gifts. But it's basically to keep this sort of going. In the mid-1400s, though, the Ming Dynasty comes to power. And the Ming Dynasty is a little nervous about all this action over here. So they end up sinking these ships and saying, we're cut off now. And so by the time you sort of get this drive by Columbus, for example, and others to go out and see what else is out there. And again, remember, Columbus isn't looking for the Americas. He's looking for the money that's in China, right? It's not about, I mean, Columbus wants this cash over here. That's what he's looking for. He's not looking for the Americas. The Americas is, again, a quote-unquote accident. And so Zheng He going somewhere else, there's just no reason for it. We just don't need to go out and do that anymore. And so Islam's not going out and looking for anything. China's not going out for looking for anything. That leaves us with Europe. So we're going to take a break here because my voice is getting scratchy, and then I'll come back and finish this up. Sorry, this is taking a little bit longer than I thought it would, but you know what?